LCARA Ham Radio presents a Time Machine Tuesday vintage video release.
Welcome to Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association. You can find us at LCARA.net, on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Instagram. If you're enjoying the videos we're producing here at LCARA, please help our club out by hitting that subscribe button. Also, give us some feedback on our videos. Click the like button, share with anybody who may find it interesting, and be sure and hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified of the next video release.
This is KY4BDP Brian for the Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association, and today we're going to bring you a radio. A lot of you guys have been wondering, when are you going to get into radios? Like, you've done all these videos on all kinds of other things. Where's the radio? Well, some of you have noticed in the antenna videos we use some radios, but we were advised early on in our ham radio careers, you need to focus on antennas and making sure those antennas fit right with your radio from a standing wave ratio, installation, and so forth. And so that's what we focused on in our series early on, are the elements to help your radio perform to its best and utmost. Now, I picked the FT2DR because it's the second radio that I purchased. I actually purchased a Bofang first because at the time I only had a technician's license. So I was only going to be connecting to 2 meters and 70 centimeters, not HF. That would come later. My actual first radio was a Bofang, but KY4CKP Chris is going to be covering one of those in his video. So I'm going to actually focus on this radio. Now, for some of you that are somewhat uninitiated, this looks like a walkie-talkie. That's kind of the old slang generic for a form factor like this, but in reality, it is not a walkie-talkie like we would think of back in the 70s. My brother and I used to have these really inexpensive walkie-talkies. They may have had one, maybe 2 channels, and they were line of sight primarily, and great for fun if you're playing G.I. Joe. This radio has a lot of other features built into it, and you have to actually have a license to operate this radio and transmit on this radio. Now, to listen, you don't need a license, but you're probably not going to plunk down $300+ for this radio just to listen. In any event, it's got a lot of cool features, and there were 3 features primarily that I was looking for when I bought this radio after I'd kind of grown out of my Bofang. Number 1, you can kind of use this radio like a mini base station. Now, I know some of you are going to say, but Brian, that's kind of silly. Well, remember, when I bought this a year and a half ago and I was really new, I wanted certain features that I could see on some of those bigger radios. One of the cool things that I like about this particular radio is the touch screen. There are some SDR radios out there that have that, and this HT has that, which is kind of cool. Now, it is a grayscale touchscreen, so that's kind of like dated, and the new FT3 has a color screen, but of course it's more expensive now. But I thought that was cool, and it cleans up the front of this unit. There aren't so many buttons. Now, of course, there are virtual buttons in the touchscreen, but just dig through some of those menus, you get to what you need. Number 2, as a feature, was its portability. I didn't want to really carry around a multi-pound radio when I'm on the road. Now, if I'm in my truck driving someplace, no problem. I can take one of the bigger radios like the 818. But when I'm in hotels in big cities like LA, Dallas, San Francisco, Seattle, Detroit, Washington, D.C., I don't want to lug around a big radio. One of these actually does the trick because, again, I had a technician's license and I'm primarily only going to use 2 meters and 70 centimeters. So I just need to participate with some of the nets that are out there, which brings me to the next feature this radio has. It has a scope built in. Now, at the time, it sounds like kind of a small little feature, but keep in mind, most radios of this form factor don't have scopes, but this one does. And so I could be in a new location, and without even going into Repeater Book, I could find frequencies that are active, and then look them up on Repeater Book, find out what the tone was for that, and participate on nets in the area I happen to be in. So those were kind of the 3 features I was going for. Something I could grow into because you could use it like a little mini base station, which I did for about a year. It has the touchscreen, which for me is a form factor and a user interface that I'm used to with other types of IT equipment. And number 3, it had a scope built in. Now, of course, it does more than that. It's got APRS and GPS, and it also does digital. But those were the 3 things I was looking at the time. Now, in the next segment, we're going to get into those 3 features and more, but primarily this is a video about your new and you want to get on the air as quickly as possible. A radio like this has so many features, it can be a little bit intimidating. You don't need to use all those features in the early going. You just need to program it, set it up, put a better antenna on it, set it up, program it for 2 meters and 70 centimeters, and get on the air, because that's the whole point of ham radio, is getting out there and putting your call sign out there. So in the next segment, we're going to talk about the layout of the radio, what you can do to it to bring it up to scratch, and we'll then get into the programming and actually use this radio on the 2 repeaters frequencies that we have through our club here in our local area. So I'll see you back here in just a moment in segment number 2, where we'll talk about many of the features on this radio, how to outfit it. Welcome back. So now we've got the radio somewhat disassembled. At the very top is a very lackluster antenna. That particular little rubber ducky, as they're sometimes called, comes with okay. I found I didn't get out very well with it. In fact, when I tried to participate on some of the 2-meter nets that we have here locally, they could read me, because our repeater antenna is pretty high up, and this will put out about 5 watts, and they could hear me, but it was a little bit rough, and I couldn't really move around too much. So one of the first things you're going to do really is replace that antenna, stock antenna, with a better one. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Next, over here on the left-hand side, we have this lithium-ion battery. This battery is phenomenal. It actually lasts quite a while. I've got the belt clip installed in this particular case so that you can attach it to your belt loop or what have you, or a go bag if that's what you're using it with, quite easily. So it makes it very handy, so you don't have to hold it all the time. And then on the right-hand side, we have the radio itself. Now, I like this radio, and again, as I told you in the introduction, one of the reasons I like it is the layout. It has a touch screen, which we'll show you in just a moment, and the front face of this radio is just a lot cleaner. I looked at some of the Kenwoods, and I looked at some of the Icom radios, and they were just full of buttons. And it's not that buttons intimidate me, because again, I'm in IT, that's something I see all the time. It's just that it wasn't as clean. This look aesthetically, this just looks cleaner to me. Now, yes, you're going to get into virtual buttons in the touch screen, but that was one of its charms to me, is that you didn't have a whole bunch of buttons distracting. Now, up here at the top, you'll notice that we have an antenna port or connection. Let me see if I can get this to focus a little better. But right there, we've got our antenna, and this is basically an SMA male, female, no male, I had it right the first time, on the top of the radio here. And what's great about this is that you'll attach your antenna, and it doesn't put as much I guess you could say wear and tear, or it doesn't strain the antenna connection inside the radio as much as, say, a Bofang. The Bofang, you actually have to screw the antenna in, but the part, it's a female going into the antenna, and your antenna actually can put a slight strain on the radio itself if you put any bend on your antenna. This puts the actual connection on the outside of the radio, and so it's not as much strain. At least that's what I hear. Also up here on the top, we have a dual knob situation. We have a volume or selector knob. You can switch the purpose of these knobs in the menus. I use the bigger knob, the fatter knob if you will, for volume, and I use the top knob for selecting things. But again, somebody might prefer that to be a little bit different in that particular case. And then we've got the touchscreen itself, which we'll get a little bit of reflection here in the video, but I like it. It's bigger, it's easy to read in even a lot of light, even if you're out in full sunlight. And then on the bottom, not a whole lot to look at. On the right, though, we do have some additional elements, and they keep these covered with rubber caps so that you can keep dirt and water out. If you open up this top one, see if I can get a fingernail in here, this is where your SD card can go. So if you want to program your radio through the SD card, you can do just that, which is kind of nice. Let's close that one up, and then we've got a screw there in the middle, and then if we open up this side, we've actually got a couple of caps. We've got a micro USB, and we also have a port for a earpiece, maybe an earphone, or possibly even an earphone PTT mic, for instance, push-to-talk mic. And then we close that one up and go into the very bottom. We have our DC input down here at the bottom, and that's where you're going to plug in the charger that comes with the radio, or it actually comes with bare wires on one end and then the proper plug on the other end if you want to connect power poles, Anderson power poles, or just plug it directly into a power supply that has bare wire connections. Outside of that, let's flip it over. We do have the push to talk button. Let me see if we can get that to focus a little better. Up at the very top, we also have a button to actually do squelch, and we also have the power button right there. So yeah, simple. I like it because the layout is simplified. It's not overly complicated at all. And it's, if you look at this radio, and some of you might even be thinking it, Brian, this radio is also a little bit ruggedized, isn't it? It is. That was another reason why I got this radio. It wasn't one of the 3 primary reasons, but you can drop check this radio, and I've drop checked it, believe me, and it still works, and it's pretty rugged. Is it IP7 rated? No, but I've had it in water, not dunked it or anything, but I've been in the rain and whatnot. No impact on this radio. So pretty rugged right out of the box. Now, the next thing you're probably going to do is you're going to install another antenna. And what I've got out here as an example is a diamond antenna. So you'll notice this guy, and let me see if I can get it right side up where you can actually read this. I was watching a video from Eric, KG4YZI down in Vero Beach. Let's see if we can get this to, there we go, to focus. And he actually went over this diamond antenna. What I like about it is it gives you quite a bit of additional length, and because of where I've got my camera, I can't show you the whole thing, but I'll stretch it through. Plus it has a piece that screws into that. So this gives you about 2.5 feet of antenna for 2 meters and 70 centimeters. And that's what I actually use on this radio primarily. I don't even use the rubber ducky, and that's one of the first things you replace anyway. Now, let's go ahead and move to putting the battery back in. Let me show you some of the menu options, and then we'll get into some of the programming. Alrighty, we're back, and what all I've done basically with the radio here in this segment is just put the battery back on and powered it up, and out of the box it might look something very much like this. No memories are set on it. It doesn't know what your frequencies are going to be for 2 meters or 70 centimeters. Nothing really. It doesn't even have your call sign. So one of the first things I did was I learned you press the display button there in the bottom middle, and this brings up this menu. Like I said earlier, there's not a lot of physical buttons on this radio, but a lot of virtual buttons, and when you hold down the display button in the top middle row, you get into this setup menu, and in the bottom right you're going to see that it has a call sign option right there, and if I click on that, this allows me to go set up my call sign. And so you can see KY4BDP is the call sign that I put in. Now, when I'm done, I'm going to hit the back button. And for all intents and purposes, I'm done with that. Now, let's just go quickly through some of these menu options. We got the display, and you can make some adjustments there. Transmit, receive options, memory options, signaling. We're going to get into that here in just a moment. Scanning, maybe some of the memory presets you already have. Group mode, which is a little bit more advanced. Wires X, more advanced. The config on the radio, just basic things. APRS, if you want to send out GPS coordinates and things along those lines. It does accept an SD card, which I showed you one of the ports for that, and you can read and write or format that card. An option button and the call sign that we just looked at. Now, the other option that you have, I'm going to back out of this for a second. This is back to the main screen. If they scroll up just a little bit here, you can see there's a button there in the virtual buttons called FMW. If you click on that, it brings up yet another menu set of options for the frequency that you're currently working with. So for instance, I've got transmit power. In fact, let's go ahead and click on that just to kind of show you that. And again, being touch button, you can get into this quite easily. And I can adjust my transmit power. I'm going to hold this with both hands, but I'm going to use the top button, or the top dial up top here, and you can see there are 4 settings: high, low 3, low 2, low 1. Ideally in ham radio, you want to transmit with the lowest amount of power to get the job done. On these HTs, most people tend to go ahead and just set it on high. But again, it partly is going to depend on how you're using it. Let's hit the back button here down at the bottom. Let's get out of this menu. But if we hit the FMW button again, we've got some other buttons that we can get into a little bit later. Probably in a second video on this radio, we'll get into this menu or set of options in this menu. Notice scope right there is one of the reasons why I bought this radio. Not going to be a part of this video, but it does have that. So let's come out of that. Let's click button or back again. We've got VFO up at the top highlighted. You can see the bottom one is a little bit grayer than the top one. The top one is a little bit more bold. And that means that's the one you're currently looking at and or accessing and or focused on. And right now it's on VFO, variable frequency. So what we want to do is put in a frequency that we can use with one of the repeaters. Now, you're going to have to work with your club. This is one of the reasons why KY4CKP and I recommend you join a club, is they're just a wealth of knowledge. Can you learn this stuff on your own, hit websites? You can, but we really don't recommend being a loner in this hobby. You know, make some friends. So we joined the local club down here. We found out what the frequencies are, and they also have a web page that shows the tone and all that. But the first thing we've got to do is we've got to put in that frequency. So we're going to click on the frequency, and it brings up a keypad. Now for me, we use 2 meters mostly in this particular area. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the frequency that we use. So 1, 4, oops, let's back that out. 4, looking through the camera here, 6, 8, 8, 0. Now this filled in some numbers for me already, but I'm going to go into the other menus regardless, because a lot of times when it's a brand new radio, you're not going to get these other things maybe filled in for you. So on the top left, you can see VFO, but notice there's already, let's see if we can get that to focus a little better. There's already, that didn't focus better. Let's try that again. There we go. Let's bring it down just a little bit where it's more easily legible. These are called offsets, and you can see it's a minus sign. Now, we're not going to use a plus sign today, but some of the higher frequencies actually do a plus offset. We're going to do a minus offset. What does that mean? Well, we're actually going to transmit on a 0.6 offset from this frequency. So 146.280. We're going to transmit on 280. We're going to receive on 146.880 because this frequency is the frequency of the repeater. It's going to transmit to us on this frequency. Now, we've got the frequency, we've got the minus offset already in there, and on the right-hand side, you're going to notice, let's get the pointer in here, we have this thing called TN, that stands for tone, and that could be either tone or tone squelch, and then we have the tone that the radio, this HT, is going to send to the repeater, 100.0, and we're using FM. On these 2 meter and 70 centimeter repeaters, we don't use single sideband. Typically, we use just FM. Now, this will also do digital. How do we know that? Well, if you look down here in the bottom right, we have another button. It's a little bit hard to read here. Let's move it up just a smidgen where you can see it, called mode. You guys see that? There we go. If I move my radio just a little bit to the left there. And mode allows me to switch how it's going to transmit. Now this is FM, but you notice the long line above it? That means it's actually in what's called automatic mode, which means it can either receive a signal that's analog or digital. But its primary setup right now is just FM, but it could receive a digital frequency on that FM band. Now if we click mode again, you can see we go straight into digital. Now these radios from Yausu, just all the Yausu line, utilizes a form of digital communication known as C4 FM, or sometimes called system fusion. And this is, again, another reason I kind of bought this radio was that our club had just installed a new repeater that utilizes system fusion. So I bought a radio that can also communicate digitally. So that's digital only though. Now if I hit the next button, you'll notice it's VW, and then we've got FM again. Now we're going to stay at FM in this particular model, but for now it could have done digital, or it can do digital or analog if I put that long straight bar over the top of FM. But right now we're just going to do straight analog. But we're not done. Now, right now, we're doing the actual 2 meter operation, and our repeater does require a tone. Now, if your repeater does tone for transmit and receive, you want to use tone squelch, and then you supply that tone frequency, which is something usually down in the low 70s. I think it is up into 200 and something hertz. Our repeater uses 77 hertz as the tone. Right now the radio is displaying 100, so that's not correct. So we're going to hold the display button down for about 2 seconds, and this is going to bring up that menu I showed you a moment ago. And where we set up our tone is under signaling. And you can see here we've got a number of menu options. If I use my dial here, I can actually, scroll up and down between these. There's the top of the menu, and you can adjust things as we go. We're not going to use a lot of these, but what I'm going to do is start scrolling down. And the first thing we have to do is go to number 11. Squelch type. And what we're going to do is you can actually touch this touch screen, and you can see that's where it is set to tone. Now, if I wanted to change that, I can use the upper dial to change it to tone squelch, which would be the tone on transmit and receive. Then we've got DCS, which is another kind of signaling to repeaters, more digital type. We don't use DCS in this example. We've got rev tone, reverse tone, and then we've got PR frequency, pager, and then we've got pager, and then we've got off, all right? Now, some repeaters are set to off. They don't use any tone, but they do kind of leave themselves open to anything communicated on that frequency. One of the nice things about a repeater having a tone is that it doesn't let just any straight frequency come in on that frequency. You have to supply the tone before it will transmit it out. It'll receive it, but it won't transmit it back out. Here we're going to choose tone once again, and we're done. So now all we have to do is hit the back button. So we've got our tone. Now we need our tone frequency, squelch frequency. So what we're going to do is go to number 12, and this is where we can set our frequency. So I'm going to use the upper dial again on the top right corner, and let's adjust this down to 77, because that's what our repeater uses. Right there. Now we only use tone for transmit. All right, so we're not going to, remember, we only selected tone under the type of squelch, not tone squelch, but just tone. So that'll only be on transmit. We're going to, HT is going to transmit 77 hertz to the repeater, which is going to unlock the repeater to receive my signal, which is then going to relay it, repeat it out to the world. We're going to hit back, 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 and take a look at that. I've now got a program frequency on 2 meters. 146,880 with a negative offset. Remember, it's going to actually transmit on my radio on 146,280, but it's going to receive on 880 because the repeater transmits on 880, and that's the frequency you put in your radio. We've got a tone in the top right corner, just tone, not tone squelch, which would be transmit and receive. We're just going to transmit the tone on 77 hertz, and we're in FM mode. All right, we're back. We've got a programmed radio. We've got VFO-A, the top frequency for our 2 meter repeater with the correct tone, we hope. And we've got the bottom VFO down here on the bottom half for the 70 centimeters. We need to test it out and see if we've done our job correctly. Remember, we didn't have to do much. Click on the frequency, set the frequency, make sure it's plus or minus for your particular repeater, and then set the tone and the tone type, tone frequency, and you should be off and running to the races. So let's reach out to the repeaters, and hopefully we'll get at least a repeater ID. Maybe we'll even get AC4DM to come back to us. So let's give it a try. Now I'm going to start on VFO-B, which is actually the 70 centimeters. So let's double check our settings here. I don't have my glasses on, and let's reach out to the repeater. KY4 BDP testing 70 centimeter setup. So the repeater did come back to me. I had it turned down a little bit there, but the repeater did make an ID. So we know we're set up correctly. Not only did we hit it with the right tone, which would unlock it, but then it talked back to us on its transmit frequency, which in this case is 443.600 with the correct tone. So we're good. Let's move up to 2 meters and let's see what we get there. This is KY4 BDP testing 2 meter setup. I'll turn this up a little bit as well. Now the repeater didn't come back to me, and that usually means it's been in use by somebody else recently, and so it didn't ID back to me due to inactivity. Let's reach out to AC4DM. Let's see if he's busy in his shop. He might not be able to come back to me, but let's see. KY4 BDP testing 2 meter setup, trying to reach AC4DM. Good afternoon, Mr. Don. I'm just trying out the 2 meter setup on the FT2DR for the YouTube folks and wanted to make sure I had my tone and all of that set up correctly. How are you reading me?
Well, you got a copy on you. Just a little bit of noise on you, but other than that, you're sounding good. Go ahead.
Notice the repeater is IDing now, and we're hearing him just fine. A little bit of static. Well, I appreciate it. Again, don't want to take up a lot of your time, but the YouTube audience does like to hear some other voices. And of course, you've got a golden radio voice, so it's coming across nicely on my end.
Very good. You're sounding good yourself, as I said, Brian. Other than just a little bit of noise on you. Of course, this hot temperature don't help the matters of the noise. You know, once again, that does generate a little noise itself. Go ahead.
Roger. Well, and I'm underneath a metal tent here, which may be impacting my signal going out to you. But I believe we've got this radio set up correctly, and I think the YouTube audience now will have a better understanding of how to do an initial frequency install for both 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Don't know if you were actually listening on 70, if you were able to hear my test. Over.
Oh, very good. Glad to hear you getting everything all set up there, Brian.
Roger. Well, again, thanks for your time, AC4DM. This is KY4BDP.
KY4BDP, AC4DM. Have a good evening.
And that, my friends, is how you program the FT2DR. AC4DM is my Elmer. He's a wonderful resource to have, and not only was he an inspiration for helping me get up set on this radio initially, not now, but back when I got started. I mean, that's why you want to join a club, folks. It's not about being a loner in this hobby, not really. I mean, certainly you can be, but it's about enjoying the camaraderie of working with new equipment and getting up and running as quickly as possible. One of the things they don't tell you in the HAMRadio manual is there's a learning curve with this. And the more people that can help mentor you, the better off you're going to be. So have fun with your radio, but also use this as an excuse to be a little bit more social maybe. Well, I'm KY4BDP, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's our first radio, or my first radio to you. You may actually see KY4CKP's video before this one. He's going to do the Bofang. But in either case, radios is what it's about. The antennas are important, the SWR and all that stuff, but we want to get on the air. We want to put our call sign out. And if you like these kind of videos, you need to subscribe to our channel. Every subscriber is important to us because we're a small channel at the moment. We'd like to aspire to be a bigger channel one day, but we need everybody to subscribe as much as possible. There's a cardinal in the background. And once you've subscribed, click that bell notification, and that will notify you the next time our video comes out, which is every Friday. Occasionally, we even put out a video on Wednesday. In addition to that, make sure you click like. If you like this kind of content, again, this is kind of a beginner type of setup on the radio, get you on the air as quickly as possible when you have that technician's license, and also comment. If you want to see more videos on this radio doing other more interesting things, like maybe using that scope, let us know. So let's close out the video here. I'm KY4BDP Brian for the Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association. Had a great time showing you this radio. 73s.